Hello and welcome to part 3 of Broadsword Academy Sacramento's introductory course. We'll just call this one How to Use a Sword. In order to learn how to use a sword, you need to learn how to hold a sword. We have two main grips for the broadsword tradition. We have something called the hammer fist grip, which is you hold just like you would a hammer. You can hold it a little bit to the top, a little bit to the bottom. We don't really care right now. Just try not to hold it at the top. Maybe have like half an inch from the top. So hammer fist grip. This is great for strength. Now, if you imagine someone's trying to cut your head off, like trying to cut right here, they're going to be swinging as hard as they can potentially. You don't want to put your sword in the way and then have it come flying out of your hand and then you get hurt. So the hammer fist is used because it's one of our strongest ways to hold our sword. We'll put our sword in front where their blade is coming in, and this is our strongest position. That is how we parry or defend ourselves, the hammer fist. Now, hammer fist, you hold like this. With the handshake grip, imagine you're reaching in to give someone a handshake. Your sword is going to be at a bit of an angle. It's going to be caught in the crook of the pad of your thumb, and it's going to be a little bit point more on line. So when you're hammer fist, you're kind of vertical. Even if you rotate all the way down to try and bring your point on line, it puts a lot of strain on your wrist. We want to avoid that. So this handshake grip naturally allows the sword to point to be on line. It increases our range. So for cutting, if you imagine cutting, if you try and extend with the hammer fist, you're kind of at limiting your angle and your reach. When you do that handshake, you instantly get a lot more range. Plus, for things like thrusting, it brings your point on line easier for that thrust. But it is inherently a little bit weaker. So if you're trying to stop yourself from being killed, hammer fist. We want that nice, big, strong position. But when we want to cut, we want to reach as far as possible and have as much control of our point as possible. So we go to the handshake grip. It's really nice to practice just when you're sitting in front of the TV. Just hold something, I don't care what it is. Ideally something sword-like, maybe just like a pole from like a Swiffer or something. Start in the hammer fist, go to your handshake. Hammer fist, handshake. Hammer fist, handshake. This transition is fundamental to your skills as a broadsword fighter. So just practice that and see what happens. Next we'll move on to the lines. Next we need to discuss lines. This is some basic terminology that will give us the vocab to describe the cuts that we'll discuss next. For the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to hold my sword more or less vertical. Now everything on the inside of the sword is over here. So that includes the inside of my arm, my chest, my stomach, my left side of my face. That's inside. Outside is this side. Outside would include the outside of my arm, my shoulder, my ribs, my outside of my right flank, the right side of my face, my back. If you imagine this as a door, inside the door is over here, outside the door is over there. It's relative to the sword position. So if you're a left-handed fencer, inside is over here now, outside is over there. Simple enough, I hope. Next we have high and low. If I'm holding the sword horizontally now, everything above is high, everything below is low. This can be broken up into quadrants now, 4 quadrants. We have high outside, high inside, low outside. And this is how we're going to actually use the vocab to describe how we do cuts. So cuts. Cut number 1 is simple enough. It's from the high outside to the low inside, following roughly a 45-degree angle. So I'm just following a line right now. Cut number 2 is the opposite, high inside to low outside. Now let's see how we actually cut someone. Now, if you look at the blade, the sharp edge is here. This is called the false edge. We won't worry about that right now. So this is the front edge. This is the thing that's actually delivering the cut. Then you have the flats. These are the wide, flat sections that aren't sharpened on either side of the sword. So edge, flat, flat. What we want to do to cut someone is we actually need to hit them with that edge. So if you imagine the opponent, you need to make sure your blade passes through leading with that edge. So if you're going at a 45-degree angle, that edge is also in line, so that way we can cut through. Now what we want to avoid is having our sword at a slight angle, so we end up hitting them with not just the edge, but also part of the flat, or worse still, the entirety of the flat. If we slap someone with the flat, it doesn't feel good, but it doesn't cut through. We need to land with that edge making contact so it can cut through the target. So when we deliver these cuts, say cut 1 for example, we need to go through the target leading with that edge before we start rotating to do anything else. It's kind of easy if you imagine you're trying to do a second cut. You already start prepping for that second cut early and you rotate your sword one way or the other and then you slap your opponent instead of cutting through. We need to avoid that. So make sure you cut through the opponent before you make anything else happen for your next move. Cut-wise, to warm up, we're going to do something we don't normally do in a fight. It's using a cut powered by the shoulder. So cut number 1, we'll start with this high outside position, cutting down through the opponent before letting the wrist relax as we go up to chamber cut 2, delivered down for cut 2. Cut 1, cut 2. Once you're through, then you can start prepping cut 1. Cut 1, cut 2. Cut 1, cut 2. Now, we wouldn't do this in a real fight, remember. There's a lot of reasons for this, but we're pretty exposed during this exchange. But this is great to warm up the shoulder before we start practicing. So do that until you're warm. Then we'll move on to how we actually will deliver most of our cuts in this tradition, and that's through the wrist. Now, don't worry about your feet. We're just worrying about the hands right now. Have your arm more or less straight out. Then I want you to move your sword to 1 to 2 o'clock, and we'll deliver that cut 1 with the wrist. Now, snap down. We're using a handshake grip. What we want to avoid is stopping like this. It puts a lot of strain on the top of that wrist, which can injure you, or at the very least, it doesn't do you any favors. So we're going to avoid stopping the sword. We're going to cut through the opponent, and then once we're through, we're going to let our wrist kind of yield and rotate to get ready into the cut 2 position at like a 10 or 11 o'clock. And then we can cut down through the opponent. Once we're through, don't stop with the wrist. Let the sword yield to the pommel, the back of the sword goes upwards to get ready for cut number 1. So cut number 1, rotate. Cut number 2, rotate. Cut number 1, rotate. Cut number 2, rotate. If we chain these together fluently, we can call it the figure 8. It's a great warm-up to bring strength and suppleness to the wrist. So again, we're in this 1 o'clock position. Cut 1, cut 2, cut 1, cut 2. Trying to stay as close to 45 as possible, cutting through the opponent before you allow your wrist to rotate to chamber the next cut. Cuts 1 and 2, chained in a figure 8. Practice that to your heart's content. It'll really help further your practice further down the line.